NFL Quarterback Club is an American football sports series that ran for 4 entries on the Nintendo 64. And the first entry in the series for Nintendo 64 was one of the console's first announced games. I vividly remember seeing a TV show before the launch of the Nintendo 64, and Quarterback Club 98 blew my mind. The presenters spent a great deal of time with the developer showcasing just how realistic the game looked, and detailing how the console's new power allowed the dramatic jump in quality over what they could have handled on the Nintendo 64 compared to the Super Nintendo. Launched in 1997, NFL Quarterback Club often goes head to head with the Madden series in terms of Nintendo 64 releases, and whilst they both had their pros and cons, I always found myself preferring to pick up this franchise first, although I did often end up playing both NFL games at some point throughout the calendar year. NFL Quarterback Club 98 was developed by Iguana Entertainment and published by Acclaim in late 1997. It had been in development for a little over a year, and actually used some of the same next generation development tools that they were using in the development for Turok Dinosaur Hunter. They adapted quickly to the console's hardware, and this was the first game in the West to run at 30 frames per second in a high-res mode, well before the launch of the N64 expansion pack. Not only this, but as they managed to secure a deal with the NFL, it was the only NFL licensed football game for that season, as Madden went to the NFL a little bit too late to tie things up for their first foray on the N64. Oddly though, both a Sega Saturn, PC and even a PlayStation 1 version of the game were in development, but also cancelled for various reasons, making NFL Quarterback Club 98 one of the coveted only 4 Nintendo 64 titles. It was a big early win for Nintendo's fledgling console. Reviews on its release ranged from average to excellent, and many publications lauded the game's great graphics, which looked more realistic than anything seen on a home console before. This in part was due to the motion capture player animations by Adrian Murrell. The game's sound department is decidedly average, but the addition of commentary is very welcome. That alone had its own controversy when Marv Albert was in court for serious allegations just a month before the game's release. This prompted Acclaim to publicly state that they would consider removing his commentary dependent on the outcome and of course if they sold enough copies to put the game into a second production run, something which they never needed to do. The controls play well and it handles exactly like you'd expect a sports title from the era to play. The biggest criticism levelled at the game was its AI, or lack thereof. Sports fans and journalists were quick to point out that when up against a computer, there were many easy exploits to tear defences apart. Combine this with somewhat floaty ball physics and limited player animations, and it often made set plays feel repetitive, and that your opponent's counter plays were nothing more than a predetermined outcome each time. I still had great fun with the title, and like most sports games it shines in multiplayer if you have someone at the same skill level as you to play with. There's every team, player and all your usual game modes to work through. Overall it was a welcome first entry on the console, but it didn't really offer anything to reinvent the wheel. It delivered what you'd expect from an early N64 sports title. It's a little bit rough around the edges, there were areas to improve, but let's not forget how much of a jump this was compared to the 16-bit iterations on Nintendo's previous console. So naturally, almost a year to the day we received NFL Quarterback Club 99, landing on store shelves in November or December of 98 depending on your region. Iguana Entertainment and Acclaim were once again the duo responsible this time. They did ship this game though as one of the first sports titles to include expansion pack support on the console. Still with the NFL license, all 31 teams are back, real players and 3D rendered stadiums, and you also have teams from NFL Europe to choose to play as if anybody is interested in that. Fans of customization in their games are treated this year as you have a full suite of creation tools for players, teams, uniforms, and even playbooks can be fully created to give you added dimensions of realism and depth. Avoiding a repeat of the previous year's controversy, play-by-play and commentary are handled by Mike Patrick and Randy Cross, which I personally feel really brings more life into the game, and it ups the television style presentation that the game offers. There was a definite upgrade in the graphics this time around, and the expansion pack allowed the studio to upgrade the texture quality, and so the first thing that you will notice when playing with the expansion pack, as shown here in the footage, is the bump in the overall visuals. So much so that the game was a finalist for both Sports Game of the Year, but also interestingly it was a finalist for Outstanding Achievement in Software Engineering, something that you rarely see sports titles be up for even now. The game reviewed slightly better than the previous year's versions, with the average score being around an 8 out of 10, some going as high into the 9s. My beloved N64 magazine scored it 90%, which made it one of their must-play titles on the console. In terms of handling though, I really didn't see much of a difference. Perhaps a more die-hard football fan would pick up on the nuances here, but as a casual fan, it felt like it played pretty much the same as the previous year's version, but with a little bit more realism in terms of the ball physics, and also the player animation seemed to take a great step up here. This game was also the last title in the series to be a console exclusive to the Nintendo 64, as the very next year the game had some massive upgrades, huge issues, but also more competition on other systems. NFL Quarterback Club 2000 was a turning point for the series, and I'm sure we've all been fans of a series which takes a sudden downturn and what looks like an irreparable downturn in quality. Quarterback Club 2000 is that game, and part of this is their own fault, but I feel the bigger factor here was just how good Madden 2000 was on the N64. It literally sent Quarterback Club packing. NFL Quarterback Club 2000 was also released on the Dreamcast, and so I think what happened here was the team were too stretched trying to push out both versions of the game, that neither version really got the attention it deserved, and that shows when both the N64 and Dreamcast versions of the game were both panned critically, often picking up scores of 2 or 3 out of 10. Interestingly though, the game has something you don't see in many N64 titles, and that's the ability to change the game's detail level. If you select low, then you get a blistering frame rate, but the players look hilariously bad. Honestly, who thought this would be a good idea? You also have a medium and high quality mode, as well as the ability to turn off shadows, logos, and many more Stadia features. Sadly though, even turning everything off doesn't help the fact that there's something seriously wrong with the game's code. Players will react in bizarre ways, with constant glitches in matches, and random animations happening when you're in play. The television style presentation they were going for often means the camera whips around into unplayable positions, which will cause you confusion and not being able to see things on field clearly enough to make any decent decisions. They also completely messed up the passing system. It's not intuitive in the slightest and causes a ton of confusion. If you fail to press the catch button at the exact right time, you'll miss even simple passes to wide open receivers. Can you just imagine a soccer game where you pass the ball, but you have to press the button again when the receiving player gets the ball, and if you don't time it perfectly right, then he won't control the ball. That's basically what this is like, and it's nearly unplayable. For me, the only saving grace in this version of the game is the ability to replay classic Super Bowls. They're all here, and you can take over the playbook at a key moment in the game, with the aim of either pushing on for the victory or turning over the end result. It's fun, but it's also in the other versions of the game, and so in all honesty, I really can't recommend anyone play this game on N64, or the Dreamcast for that matter. With such a disaster under their belt, it was back to the drawing board for the series, and a final hurrah was planned for a release, again on the Dreamcast and the N64. Development this time was handed over to High Voltage Software, but Acclaim still did the publishing honours with this one. Landing on store shelves earlier than usual in late summer of 2000, NFL Quarterback Club 2001 was set with poor to average reviews on its release, and so any plans to resurrect the series after the dreadful previous entry were really short-lived with this one. Up against the 2K series on other platforms, its arch rival Madden on N64, the game was an improvement, but I must give credit to High Voltage for that, especially as it was their first American football title to be worked on. The frame rate runs somewhat better than the previous year, but this one is a core example of yet another N64 game where the expansion pack prioritises visuals over fluidity in game. Sure, it looked phenomenal in stills and magazine shots, but anyone watching the footage of the game will quickly realise those visuals come at a cost. They did add a shoulder charge button, which makes the game feel a little bit more arcade-like, and it's something odd for a serious sports simulation title. It's a nice idea, but any expectations you have of charging through defence lines with it will be short-lived, as it adds very little to the game and is often dealt with fairly swiftly by the game's AI. The developer wanted to tweak the passing in the game after how bad the previous years was, this time by allowing touch passing, which would result in your passes being handled by how long you press the pass button for. In my opinion, this doesn't sound great on paper, and in game it completely misses the mark. Passing in the game just isn't fun and seems a million miles behind what Electronic Arts were putting out by this time. I'll also highlight the terrible audio in the game, or should I say lack thereof. If you love the hard-hitting, bone-crunching, blood-curdling noises found in other NFL games, then this would be the Canadian Football League in comparison. Even with the effects turned up to high, everything just sounds like a sound engineer had been punching a king-size mattress for a few hours and slapped those sound recordings into the game. It's too soft, sounds bizarrely out of place in game, and you'd expect your subwoofer to be exploding with grumbles from, but it just never happens here. Now don't get me started on the play-by-play, which also seems to have taken a step back. Whilst the quality may be on par with the previous entries, the amount of repetition of lines of dialogue was crazy here, and you shouldn't be heading for hearing test if you hear the same play-by-play line multiple times in a row. That's just how this game rolls. The NFL Quarterback Club series is such a mixed bag on the N64. Sure, we all remember the ISS versus FIFA arguments, the Wayne Gretzky hockey versus NHL breakaway discussions, but at the start of the N64's life, NFL Quarterback Club was the American football game to play on the console. So it's a sad end to the series which started so brightly, and just goes to show that one bad entry in the series can completely destroy a franchise. These days gamers seem to be more forgiving of the odd bad annual release, but back then, especially at the turn of the millennium, it appears that it was a one and done affair with the NFL Quarterback Club series. So what's your thoughts on the series? I have no doubt many of you will have had countless late nights playing many of these games with friends back in the day, and so sound off in the comments below some of your personal greatest moments playing them. I'd also love to know what entries in any gaming series which you think killed a franchise completely. As always, let me know your thoughts and feelings, comments and views down below, and until next time.